So as Yelena said, I'm Ted Blickwedel. I'm a retired Marine and combat veteran. In fact, I grew up in Emporium, as it turns out. I left here at the age of 10 in 1965. My grandfather, Roy Swanson, I don't know if that rings a bell with any of you, but he was actually good friends with General McNarney. They graduated together from Cameron County High School back in the day in 1911. And since that time, going fast forward, I ended up going to Penn State, got a degree in psychology and a master's in education rehabilitation, after which I went into the Marine Corps over a 27-year period, but I need to specify I wasn't on active duty every day of the year throughout the calendar year. I did what was called active duty special works under the individual ready reserves after my initial period of active duty. And so I had extended periods of active duty assignments intermittently, mostly overseas during that 27-year period between 1979 and 2006 when I finally retired. After which I went back to school to get another master's degree in clinical social work, 2006 to 2008. And afterwards, I worked for the VA in the Vet Center program. Do you all know what the Vet Center program is? Okay. And I did that between 2009 and 2018. And then I had left, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. For those of you that don't know, the Vet Center program was established in 1979, congressionally mandated, and actually got started by Max Cleland, who was a Vietnam veteran himself, a triplegic. He's passed away a few years ago. He was the first head of the VA ever under the Carter administration. He ended up becoming a U.S. Senator for 18 years in Georgia. And he's the one that really got the program going. And it was only for Vietnam veterans. And it was a peer-to-peer kind of support and counseling that was done among Vietnam veterans among themselves. And over years going by, people got hired that were licensed clinicians and so forth, but the people that were doing the peer-to-peer were grandfathered in and so on. And eventually, in the early 90s, the program opened up to all war veterans from all war eras, World War II, all the way through the present day conflicts. And for most of that time, the program was such, there wasn't any stringent requirements on expectations, how many people you had to see. You could spend as much time as you needed with people that needed the services that they needed. There wasn't really any pressure. And so that had changed, and that's what this is all about. And that's what I wanted to address tonight. The basic issue being, and the things I'm going to cover tonight is the main topic of how the excessive performance metrics for counselors had increased to the point it was burning them out, damaging their welfare, and it was actually compromising quality mental health care for veterans. That's the main topic of the book. I also am going to talk about tonight, it's also covered in the book, the retaliation tactics that occur, that happen to me when you speak truth to power, and what the devastating impacts of that are personally, for your family, your psychosocial networks. And because of what I've heard from a number of people in town since I've been here, and this has been alarming and saddening to me, is the suicide rate that exists around here and the lack of mental health services. So part of what I want to also include in this is some information about resources, not just for the general public, but also for veterans specifically, that I think is valuable. And in fact, those sheets you see on the table out there that are vertical against that stand has the websites that I'm going to talk about in more detail later then. And then I'll be wrapping up with a question and answer period, and after that there'll be a book signing for any of you that feel interested in purchasing a book at a 20% discount compared to going to Amazon, and with all the shipping and handling fees and so forth. So, and I also have a card, a business card with my contact information should you want to reach out for some reason. It also has my website on there that talks about the book. And on the website, you should know, is a bio and a media tab that covers all my local and national media interviews that had gone on over the last few years with all this, including NPR, NBC, and the Military Times. So people that feel they want to watch some of that or read the associated web articles, feel free to do that. And the one thing about the book, there is no references in the book. And the reason for that, there was so much supporting documentation for transparency that really needed to be included. That's actually in a references tab on the website. Listed chapter by chapter, all the supporting documentation and references that substantiate everything that's covered in the book. And I should add too that there was hundreds of hours of interviews conducted by my co-author, counselors, veterans receiving services, people in other disciplines, and people that have already submitted reviews on the book. And the general feedback I hear, and these things I just outlined that we're going to cover tonight, are all mentioned in detail in the book, but the biggest thing I hear from people consensually that seems to be the main theme is that this book is a must-read for anyone that cares about our nation's veterans and those that serve them. It's compelling, and it's a story that needs to be heard, and awareness has to be raised about these issues, and people being inspired for the correct action to take place of this injustice that's been happening is corrected. And that's the bottom line. That being said, I wanted to, rather than just hearing from me, in my story, my experience about this, I think it's also important that you hear what other people had to say that have read the book. So there's a few reviews that I would like to share with you. One from the perspective of a counselor who works in the system. In fact, two of them. One is my colleague in Rhode Island, another one is someone else from Florida who did reviews on the book. Someone else who's a Vietnam veteran, Silver Star recipient, who happens to be the national chaplain for the Vietnam Veterans of America, who had also worked in the Boston healthcare system as their chaplain for 27 years. And also from a veteran, a Marine veteran, who actually received services in the VA, his experiences. And I think that's important to do that. And just before that, you probably might be wondering, why the title Broken Promises? So the story behind that is, if you're not aware, and this is what the VA's mission statement is based off of. The VA's mission statement is based off a quote from Abraham Lincoln in 1865 after the Civil War. And you all know how horrific that was and the carnage that happened then. And so what he said was, the quote from Abraham Lincoln, and again, this is the VA mission statement: to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, by serving and honoring the men and women who are American veterans. And given what I've just explained already, you can sort of get the sense of how the promise wasn't kept, and thus the title Broken Promises. And that's how that came about, just to give you a little background on that. And so before I get into some detail and highlights of the book and the issues I was mentioning before that I wanted to cover, I first, again, just wanted to let you hear from somebody else besides me that has read the book, has had their own experiences, and I think I'll start with this Marine Corps captain who had received services from the VA. And here's what he had to say after reading the book. The description of the failures in the mental health care of veterans and the self-preservation defenses thrown up by the supervisory professionals in charge trigger my own painful memories of emotional traumas and isolation in trying to receive adequate mental health services when I left the Corps. As I read, the more frustrated I became and the more I identified with the veterans who had been underserved to meet quotas. It is a raw wound that has not yet started to heal. That's his experience. From one of my own colleagues, a psychologist at the Vet Center in Rhode Island, one of the brave souls that stood up for me behind the scenes, because as you can imagine, when I spoke truth to power and they saw the retaliation against me, everybody ran for the tall grass. So I'm left holding the bag, as those kinds of things go. But here's what she had to say. Counselors are trained to keep ethical standards regarding the progress and duration of therapy. Unrealistic performance standards strain this ethical bond of trust between veterans and their counselors and actually hinder the healing process. This book is a must-read to raise awareness and to inspire the reader to prevent further erosion of healing in the vet centers and in many other arenas where misapplied corporate models treat workers and those they care for as objects. And just two others real quick, as I referenced. This is from I'm going to be talking about what happened and the responses and just generally how many responses I got from counselors. But just understand, this pretty much is speaking for what other counselors have to say, because I got a lot of responses you'll hear about in reference to how I started this whole thing, when I started addressing these issues. And one of these quotes that I got from emails from people when I first raised the issue, I just want to read you one of them. But this speaks for the scores of responses I got from other counselors across the country. So I think this one pretty much covers pretty much what everyone else had to say in theirs. And this is just a real good example of how everybody was in concert with this who works in the Vet Center program, offering services to counselors. So this is what one counselor had to say in response to these issues that I had addressed that had national exposure. Your experience is much the same as ours in Florida. Throughout my time in the Vet Center program, our leadership has ruthlessly fixated on productivity numbers using fear and intimidation to force compliance. It's an unwritten rule in our region that anyone who opposes this, voices dissent, or otherwise says the wrong thing in meetings will eventually lose their job. No constructive discussion about how to be successful and no training, but always threats. In a recent monthly teleconference, our director stated that with the changes from the Accountability Act, we can do whatever we want and there's nothing the union can do to stop us. Many of my colleagues were shocked that she could say such a thing, but given my experience, that's how they operate anyway. I have no idea how to fix this. I am often shocked that it's happening at all. And the last thing I just wanted to share was from the gentleman I had referenced here, who is the National Chaplain for the Vietnam Veterans of America, Vietnam veteran, Silver Star recipient. After reading Broken Promises, his comment, guess I lost, oh there it is, okay. So bear with me here, my pages are kind of sticking together here. has. So this is what he had to say. And again, he worked in the VA healthcare system up in Boston for 27 years as well. He has single-handedly taken on the largest healthcare institution in the country, the Veterans Health Administration. This is a fascinating read and engages the reader to join the fight. As one who has worked for a short time in the Vet Center program and 27 years as a chief of chaplain service for the VA Boston healthcare system, I can attest that what Blickwedel exposes is factual and all-encompassing. That's his experience. So it's not like I was a disgruntled employee, that was just, going off half-cocked. I mean, these are comments from credible people. I'm just giving you an example of a few of them. There's many more than that. Just to give you an idea of what other people were feeling as well. Because it is a national tragedy, quite frankly, and it is systemic and it needs to be corrected. So that being said, I'm going to kind of walk you through the timeline of what happened, not just with the issue that was raised, but the part with the retaliation and its impact. I'm going to be kind of combining them both together just because things happened together along the way and how this all unfolded in the timeline rather than going back and forth. So what happened is, as you know, given the excessive metrics and how it was impacting counselors and compromising quality care for veterans. So when this came up after they changed the metrics, this happened in 2016. They came out with a memorandum specifying these visit counts that were excessive, and to the point where it's really unethical because the research shows that they exceeded the boundaries that show that once you do, you start having negative treatment outcomes. So obviously, it's not a good thing, just from that standpoint, just from research substantiating that. So after we all, throughout the country, through these clinical site visits, it fell on deaf ears when we addressed this. I finally, in January of 2018, had enough of this, so I addressed it with the leadership in Washington to the chief officer of the Vet Center program. He failed to respond, and a week later, on the 25th of January, I'll never forget, I had sent out that same email to him again with additional comments, but this time I infoed everybody in the country in the Vet Center program, all the counselors. And this is where, if you will, the you-know-what hit the you-know-what. And that's kind of where it all began. So when that happened, within 24 hours, he miraculously responds to address this. Why? Because I'm starting to get responses, replied to all, echoing everything I was saying. And it was not looking good for them, so they had to silence me. They had to shut me down from where they're coming from as a bureaucracy, which is standard operating procedure, by the way, when those kinds of things go on. And so, so I got about 57 responses from 42 different vet centers across 25 states. Now, that may sound like a lot, and there could have been in the hundreds of responses, but why not? Because within 36 hours after I'd gone out with that second email, they shut down my computer. But I knew that was probably coming, so I forwarded everything to my personal account, made copies of everything. But when I was getting these responses, I will never forget, January 26th, 2018, in that moment, in my office, I mean, I knew there was a problem, but when I was reading these emails and seeing how it was really impacting these counselors and how it was impacting veterans from their perspective and what was going on in their vet center, I was literally in tears. I shut my door and I just had to read these responses, and they were looking for me for de facto leadership. I had opened up Pandora's box, and they were looking for hope. And in that moment, I knew I was the anointed one, so to speak, not self-anointed, believe me, because it's not something I really ever envisioned taking on, but I felt obligated. I had to, because I opened up Pandora's box. And so, as things ensued, a week after that, I'd taken terminal leave prior to my official retirement date, so I'm technically still an employee. I'm being badmouthed by the director a week after I left with my colleagues, basically making comments insinuating that I'm a mentally unstable combat veteran. And unfortunately, I had two brave colleagues who stood up for me, within the center and kept me appraised of what was going on, so I could stay a step ahead of things along the way. And then people throughout the country that had responded to me, those 57, I called every single one of them, and we went off the VA.gov grid, and they were giving me some supporting documentation, because at that point when I left, I started to file grievances with various federal agencies, the VA, OIG, OSC, ORM, and EEO, about all this, and because of retaliation against me. And then what happens, within a couple weeks after I left, I'm finding out through email from some assistant deputy director, well, you make people uncomfortable here, you shouldn't come back to the vet center. Hey, I didn't make them uncomfortable. What made them uncomfortable is how they handled it. Because when they saw what they were doing to me, that was also intentful to shut them up so they wouldn't speak up, because they didn't want to be retaliated against. So it's how they handled it that was making them uncomfortable, not what I did. See how that gaslighting works? They turn it around to make it appear something different and turn it all back on you, the counter accusations. And so that kind of went on back and forth as well. So I then, a week later, was told, oh, and by the way, if you show up to the vet center, the police will be called. Really? I never threatened anybody or did anything to warrant that. And that was just part of shutting me down. And I can't, the impact of that, I was severely angry and depressed. I was in a very bad place while this was going on, while I'm trying to file these grievances with these federal agencies. And so during that 2-month period between February and March of 2018, I'm in this very bad emotional state, this anger, this rage, this depression, and now all of a sudden, and that's part of the impact it has, you feel worthless, you're second guessing yourself sometimes because of the gaslight. Imagine that. They're that good, they even have you second guessing yourself. And so so during that time, I'm sedentary, working on all these documents for these grievances, filed with different federal agencies, and at the end of March, I had unknowingly developed clots along the way in those 2 months. I had a submassive pulmonary embolism, which should have killed me, and I found out from doctors later, the kind I had, the mortality rate's 100%. I shouldn't be here. And I don't have any, blood tests revealed I don't have a proclivity to developing clots. So it was this emotional state. It literally almost killed me. So as I'm bouncing back from that, within a month, I go off to a conference with an energy psychology organization, we'll hear about later as a resource, where I met somebody, because I was in a bad way. I was in a very deep and dark place, and it was a very lonely place because I really didn't have any support. I'm kind of the tip of the spear taking this on and no one really standing with me, but felt I still had to do the right thing for the right reason. So I met this gentleman who lived in Pennsylvania who basically did a therapeutic intensive with me involving Native American shamanic medicine, very powerful, energy psychology interventions, which you'll hear about later as part of resources that has to do with the cutting edge of dealing with anxiety and PTSD and even depression. That was useful. He also did dream work and this thing called family constellations, which basically involves objects being placed on the floor representing emotions or different people in your life and certain events that happened, and you actually bring the living spirits of what they represent to those objects, and it's like they're alive. And you go through this process, and when you finally clear these things and the constellation evolves, you're actually clearing trauma not only for yourself but for your ancestral lineage. It's very powerful. So I was down at his place in Pennsylvania for 6 days. 4 of the days in the middle, I actually was living in the woods near his cabin, attending to a fire ceremoniously as part of the process, and no food for 4 days. I could only drink water. Now that may sound extreme, but I was so desperate with where I was at, I would have jumped off the end of the earth. That's where I was at. And as you hear sometimes, desperate situations, demand desperate measures sometimes. For me, that's what I had to do, because if this didn't work, I may not be here, to be quite honest with you. That's how bad it was. So I bounced back from that, and I'm doing other things for my self-care along the way, and I'll explain some of that as this timeline unfolds. But as my daughter can attest to, Michelle, who surprised me by showing up here today from Rhode Island with her husband Pete. She'll tell you, part of what happened, not just the state I was in for myself, but the impact it had on the family. I wasn't available. I wasn't emotionally available. And I'm isolating. There'd be family events. I wouldn't show up, or sometimes if I did, after an hour or two, I'd go off by myself and sit in some, quiet place in the house and just wait for my wife to come get me and go home, and that kind of thing. And so, as all this was unfolding, it's all kind of happening at the same time, I started getting these news interviews about this issue, locally and nationally, NPR, Military Times, NBC. It's all on the media tab on my website. And that happened over a few year period. But while all this is going on, I contact my senator in Rhode Island with substantiating documentation, and I eventually got the support of my congressman on the House side with this as well. And so what ended up happening because of my senator is there was a federal GAO, Government Accountability Office investigation that was launched that substantiated all of my allegations. And so that went on for about a year, between November of 2019 and the report came out September of 2020, validating everything. Well, a few months after that, getting into January of 2021, congressional legislation was drafted because of that GAO investigation, and it's called the Vet Center Improvement Act, which deals with these issues and how it needs to be corrected. And basically, I do want to say one thing is, when that GAO report first came out, you wouldn't believe, the VA, their response to that was so insidiously deceptive, whereby what they did is say, oh yeah, we agree with your recommendations, but then in between the lines with other things they were saying, basically saying they're going to continue to do what they've been doing all along. You gotta be kidding me. So I had to rebut that, and I had submitted a statement for the record to the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. I called the House and Senate side of my congressional delegates in Rhode Island, their staff, saying, no, this is not good. Let me give you a written response to that. And then, of course, I had to rebut testimony when the bill finally came out and it got introduced to the House and Senate Committees on Veterans Affairs in the end of May of 2021. they're testifying against the bill, but by that time I'd reached out to veteran service organizations in Washington, got the backing of the VFW, the DAV, American Legion, and one or two others I can't remember off the top of my head, and basically refuting their testimony. And I had to submit a statement to my congressional delegates, staff on the House and Senate side, basically saying, no, this is why this is not right. And so they were convinced to continue going forward through the committees. And at this point, the House has passed the bill. So I'm just waiting on the Senate, and that should happen hopefully sometime before the end of the fiscal year, by the end of this September. So I'm tracking that. So that's kind of what has happened, you know, on the process side of the heavy lifting of all of this and where it led. And then along the way too, you know, for my own self-care, you know, part of this therapeutic intensive, you know, I've been personally doing, you know, meditation, these energy psychology interventions. I'll talk about in more detail later, doing some of that to regulate and to process some of the things I was still going through, some of it residually, you know, some of the stuff that would get triggered. And have any of you heard of A Course in Miracles by any chance? Anybody here? Okay. Basically, it's based on Christian perspectives of spirituality, and it's basically a program. There's a text with 32 chapters, but there's also a lesson to do every day of the year for 365 days that's very powerful. And basically the whole crux of it is dropping your misperceptions to have right vision, to have clarity and purity of spiritual vision, rather than it being mucked up by human dogma and things that get in the way of that. And basically the whole underlying theme is forgiveness, is what it comes down to, out of compassion and, you know, unconditional love for yourself and others. And for me, that was also an instrumental piece, because if you can imagine where I was at the beginning of this, and using that and other self-care interventions that I was just mentioning, it allowed me to come to a place of spiritual and emotional healing and growth that otherwise wouldn't have been possible, and to a place where I actually came to a place of compassion and forgiveness. I didn't think it was possible. I didn't. So that is one of the real underlying stories behind the story, is that process in my own spiritual emotional growth. And, you know, if you look at it, you know, in our lives here on this planet, that's kind of what we're really here fundamentally to do anyway. You know, so that, in spite of how bad all this was, you know, that was an opportunity that I was given by the universe to use in that fashion, and making the right decisions to do that. And, you know, it turned out to be a very beneficial thing. So I actually kind of look at my perpetrators at this point. I almost, you know, if I were to see them on the street right now, I would thank them for having done what they did, because of what it gave me the opportunity to do in my own healing and growth, and other things that I had triggered that I thought I'd taken care of that I didn't, that brought that to my level of awareness. So in a way, it was kind of win-win, you know, and taking a negative situation and turning it into a constructive, positive thing, you know, was very beneficial. So, trying to think. So, you know, one of the things too, you know, so in Broken Promises, I do not only I go into detail about this, but about the retaliation, the specific tactics they use, which is standard operating procedure, you know, the shunning, the isolating, the distancing, the counter accusations, the mobbing, trying to turn people against you. The things they did for that was just incredible. You know, they actually had an assistant district director come down from region to meet with each one of the counselors in my vet center to kind of make it look like Ted doesn't know what he's talking about, you know, it's all in his head, putting fear in him. You know, that was part of it. But the one last thing that I did want to mention, just as an example of retaliation, this was last March. I'd go down to my vet center to drop off a memorial donation for a fallen comrade, a counselor I used to work with, who had died from cancer. I was a pallbearer at her funeral. She's was a Navy nurse during the Vietnam era. Her husband, a captain, was a Vietnam veteran. And in accordance with her obituary, this is what she wanted, for this donation to be used for veterans receiving services at the vet center. So that's what I did. I hadn't been there since I left. She's not even there that day. I find out from my two colleagues the next day that have been standing up for me behind the scenes, oh, she's filing a police report against you to get you trespassed from the vet center. Oh, okay. And at the time, that just kind of re-triggered a bunch of things, as you can imagine. It's like, I didn't do anything to warrant that. So, so what I found out then, she files a false police report, full of lies, to the VA police. I go there to get a copy of the report, and, oh, we can't, it's still under investigation. Oh, really? They never interviewed me? They never interviewed the counselor that assaulted the vet center that day? It wasn't ongoing. This was a ploy. They're withholding evidence. So I had to hire a law firm to get this no trespass order rescinded, which it was successfully, based on my two colleagues with interrogatories they had signed for another purpose, and another counselor who jumped on board, who was an Army veteran, who submitted a statement to my lawyer about what really happened and didn't happen. And once the township got a hold of this, they dropped it in a New York minute because they were afraid of getting involved in a federal whistleblower lawsuit. Within 6 hours, the chief of police of Warwick, Rhode Island, had a letter to my lawyer saying this whole thing is dropped. So they were worried. And then a letter went out from my lawyer, a scathing letter to my director. You know, you keep this up, you keep doing this kind of stuff, we're coming after you with all legal means possible. And the head guy in Washington, right, originally sent that email to, addressing all this, he got a copy of that too. Just to put him on notice, and I wanted him to send, and he did, a letter to the chief of the VA police. So he got one too, just to put him on notice. But it cost me tens of thousands of dollars. So this is another ramification. Not only, you know, was it impactful, the retaliation for me and my family, but my colleagues. The fear of God put in them, or afraid, seeing what happened to me, being afraid to speak up. It caused a lot of stress for them, and a lot of anxiety. And then the financial legal consequences, tens of thousands of dollars, just to handle this and the EEO stuff I went through. And Whistleblowers of America, another resource you'll hear about later, sponsored a GoFundMe page to help me recoup my legal expenses. And so that's still active. In fact, that GoFundMe site is a link under my bio tab on my website. Those that feel, you know, compelled to contribute, you know, not, you know, it's optional, of course. But so those are some of the things that happened along the way as this unfolded. So that covers the issue in the backgrounds, the media, the political action, and the retaliation piece and its impact. But one thing I also wanted to note is the end of the book ends on a good note. It's inspiring for counselors, for whistleblowers, and veterans, all alike, to be able to stand up, speak truth to power, or maybe support those that are to take on such a crusade, because I offer a blueprint of how to do this kind of thing, how to take on this kind of campaign with the maximum effectiveness in order to have the most favorable outcome possible. And it's from the lessons learned in this experience, and what it takes to do that, the elements that need to come together, and things that you need to have happen along the way. And so it's a nice step-by-step, you know, process that people can follow in order to do that. And again, or to support others that are in the process if they don't take on such an effort themselves. So it has a lot of benefit that way. A lot of people really like that part because it ends on a note of hope, on a constructive note, and it shows, because of what I've been able to achieve with this, is, you can take on the government and win. And in the end, it's not about me, it's about the veterans, and it's about those that care for them in the system. That's what this whole thing is about. I think there's some other things I could go over. It's not necessary. Let me just double check something real quick here. Yeah, I'll save this for a little bit later. So at this point, I think, before I even wrap up, are there any questions or comments at this point? Because I covered a lot of ground. I think that this would be a good time to do that.
I hate how, whether it's the military, the Fed, the MIC, whatever, I hate how the first way that they try to silence people they're afraid of is to discredit them and make them seem like they're insane. I mean, if you're not credible, you're not a threat any longer, right? So.
Right, and see, one of the things is, so I have the media backing me up.
Right.
I have my colleagues backing me up. I have my congressional delegates in Rhode Island backing me up. The GAO investigation comes out substantiating my allegations, and now there's congressional legislation. Mm-hmm. And excuse me, I'm a half-cocked loose cannon. Well,
right.
No.
It's good to have people in your corner, for sure.
Yeah, so that, yeah. But I can tell you that, when you take something like this on, I made two big mistakes. I think I should point this out, is I didn't build a network of support before I took this on. I just went diddle right up the middle and I started having at it. And that was a big mistake. Because I'm in it alone. You really have to have support. I eventually gained that along the way, and that certainly helped. And I couldn't have done it without that. But I really should have established more of that at the beginning, and not have been left in such an alone place, taking this on by myself. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is just as a testimony to my embolism that almost killed me. I obviously lacked very much the self-care things I should have been doing to deal with that. And so, I eventually got that straightened out as I gave examples of, but I should have had something more consistent in place, early on, just to give you, a couple of examples, and there's other things I outline with that at the end of the book as well. But, so, what I wanted to do at this point, this is kind of an add-on to what I normally present, but given as I shared at the beginning, what I've heard about what's going on in this community, and again, the websites are listed on that sheet, that's against that stand on the desk there by the door, are a few resources. You've heard me mention energy psychology interventions. Well, what really is that? And I think just a brief description to sum that up. Basically, it's a few types of interventions whereby it's kind of like acupuncture but without the needles, where you're applying pressure or tapping to different acupoints on the body associated with various emotions, and where they are transmitted through the energy meridians to where they're stored in the body and in vital organs, because research has shown that trauma is stored in the body somatically. And so when you deal with the trauma somatically, which is what these techniques do, you're clearing the trauma, you're clearing the impact of it, where the emotional charges of it are released. You'll still have the memory, but you're not impacted by it in terms of the various negative emotions that are associated with it. That can be clear. And that's basically what these things do. And the organization behind that I'm a member of is called the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, or ACEP. And their website's mentioned on that sheet, energypsych.org. And the nice thing about that is, for the general population, you can go to this site. They have a link for resources for resilience. And these are 5 categories of different types of situations or circumstances that might need to be dealt with these interventions, and anxiety and depression, some other things. And each one of those has 3 videos, each with written instructions that you can follow when you go through the videos and use these things for yourself. It's right there. You don't have to be taught by it, it's right there. And then once you've gone through the video, you can print, these instructions, and having done it, now it makes sense because you've been through it with the video. So it helps regulate, emotions and such. So that's a great resource. They have a research tab that gets into the evidence-based background of all this, the gold standard of research, the randomized controlled studies. And there's been hundreds of them now that validate this, and to the point where it's more effective than a lot of other conventional interventions out there. So they also have training. You can sign up for it. It can be done via Zoom, or you can go in person sometimes when they have it live. And you don't have to be a trained therapist or licensed. You can take these trainings and get an alternate certification, and some people do that as a life coach without being a licensed clinician, and can actually use that as part of a life coaching type of thing. And it's great, and you can learn that, and actually to the point where you can actually show other people how to do it. So it's a very valuable resource in that regard. And then for veterans specifically, there's what's called Stress Solutions. Again, it's on the sheet, www.stresssolution.org. They have helped over 22,000 veterans to date. Fabulous, using these energy psychology techniques, like the emotional freedom techniques, thought field therapy, just to name a couple. And veterans can go to this site. It's a nonprofit organization. A colleague of mine who's an internationally renowned researcher and practitioner in this field, Dawson Church, helped organize this. And it's fabulous. So veterans can go to this and sign up for free sessions. Free. And done via Zoom, obviously, being at a distance who actually is doing these things. But it's just as effective as if you go to a session in person. And it's very valuable. And here's what I want to share too, real briefly here, if I may, is about the effectiveness of this stuff, and for veterans specifically. For the general population, basically these techniques that I'm referring to, fewer treatment sessions are required, okay? The results are longer lasting. It's easy to learn. There's no negative side effects, like with other types of interventions or talking therapies, where you're not really processing anything, and you're actually, making the trauma worse. You're amplifying it because you're talking about something without processing. It's triggering stuff, and what good does that do, right? You need to process it. So, as far as veterans are concerned, they did some studies specifically for veterans using emotional freedom techniques. Studies have shown that 86% of 49 war veterans studied no longer had PTSD symptoms after 6-hour-long EFT sessions. It's 2 times as effective and 2 times faster than some of the conventional therapies. And it's been replicated. So it's not like just a one-time thing, this is what the study showed. There have been other studies to replicate this, to validate it. So it's not just based on one study. And the last thing is Whistleblowers of America, again, on the sheet, whistleblowersofamerica.org is an organization I've been affiliated with, who was very important. I wish I would have hooked up with them earlier, talking about a network of support, because they have peer-to-peer support, certification, where you can, be more bona fide to help people mentor through going through a whistleblowing process, because you learn about the strategies used against you, what are the mechanisms and other coping things that you can do to navigate through it, and resources you can go to legally and otherwise, that are useful in the process. And they have a national conference every year. This year down in Pensacola in September, I'll be on one of their panels down there. The founder and CEO, Jackie Garrick, I work very closely with her, and she's very involved in testifying before Congress about stronger whistleblower legislation that truly protects and supports whistleblowers that speak truth to power. So that is kind of in the works. That's kind of the second tier of what needs to happen besides these issues I was telling you all about tonight within the system. So what can happen from here in terms of what people can do? Well, right now, the most important thing to get the word out about all this, frankly, is my book, because painstakingly it covers all the elements of these issues. I've highlighted some of them, and just to raise awareness and to inspire corrective action to happen so these injustices are corrected. So it's important to get the word out. Read the book and encourage other people to do the same and to spread the word. And along the way, since we're still waiting on the Senate, in the chapter on the legislation, it's 15 or 16, I mentioned the specific bill numbers for the Veteran Improvement Act 1944, S 1944. Please contact your senators and have them support the Vet Center Improvement Act. Very important, S 1944, because in the end, this is what it's all about, and this is the last thing we're waiting on for this legislation to pass, so that would be very, very helpful.
I've got a quick question about the
Yes.
legislation. Do you think that as it is currently written, that the legislation sufficiently addresses the issues that you specifically saw?
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's part of what I meant to mention, but there were so many other things I wanted to cover. So basically what this legislation does is it directs the VA Secretary with GAO and congressional oversight to establish an internal working group made up of vet center directors and counselors to make recommendations to the VA Secretary what to do to specifically address these issues through feedback from counselors in the field on an annual basis into an electronic database, my words, that cannot be altered by any party that's anonymous, that has third-party access to make it airtight. So nothing can be deleted, nothing can be altered, nothing can be changed. This is the raw feedback we're getting, and this is upon which we're going to be making these recommendations from this internal working group, and third-party oversight where other third parties like the GAO or whoever can have access to that. And specifically, it does specify dealing with these excessive performance metrics, and as it relates to, is it impacting mental health care or quality care for veterans and counselor welfare. So yes, it specifically addresses that, and even to the point, my language again, that these questions also have to be open-ended, not just closed-ended, where they can steer you to answer things that don't really have to do, with the issue at hand. So I think it adequately covers the issue. So,
Great.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the most common denominators would be, my generation, big boys don't cry.
Mm.
So, a vet would show my weakness if I apply for help and they refuse to do it. And I have a lot of friends that say, I have all these rights that I can take, but what prevents them, from your experience, of not applying for that or getting counsel? And there's someone in this room that had a brother that we love very much, and he was seeking help, right? And
Yeah, they did.
you can talk
He contacted
personal
me.
experience.
Mhm.
What, from your experience, do you find the resistance? Does it come as showing weakness, or we talked about maybe going to Warren for the local, I don't know where the local VA hospital is, or center is. What do you find from your experience prevents them from asking for help, or seeking help, not getting it?
The old school mentality has been, if men shouldn't cry, show emotions. If you do, it's a sign of weakness. If you ask for help, it's a sign of weakness. And unfortunately, if you do, that can be impacting of your performance. And that could be reflected on performance evaluation, so nobody wants to take that chance. Now, fortunately, that has been changing over the last decade. It has changed. And actually, help is being encouraged for members of the military to seek help. Does that mean there aren't still little pockets here and there where you run into that resistance? Yeah, there's some of that still there, but fortunately, that's starting to be overcome.
But by not taking advantage of those,
Mm-hmm.
that funding goes away because it's not being met.
Right, so what I tell people, because as a sideline to the clinical work I've done, I kind of ride shotgun and help people with veterans benefits, right? And because I know the system and how that works. So what I would tell, well, I don't need it, and there's other people that need it more than me, and I said, look, you know what? You're a veteran. These entitlements are there for all veterans. You're entitled to it like everybody else. And oh, by the way, if you don't apply, you're doing a disservice to other veterans, because by not applying, now that's less money that might be appropriated based on the number of applications that are being put in, that where other people that might need it aren't gonna get it, because the money isn't gonna be there. So it's like, oh. And I said, besides, you deserve it. You should do that. And to give it more credibility, being a veteran myself, I'm service connected. So when I tell them, well, and I did, and I'm service connected, so here I am. They're coming to me to seek help, and I'm telling them it's okay. Oh, look, and I've been doing it too, to be genuine, to show that it's okay, and they changed their mind. And I've had people that didn't want to submit an appeal for the same reasons, and I convinced them to do that. And these are pretty hardcore people that, it's okay, other people need it more than I do, or I don't deserve it, or, and so that's kind of how I've handled those objections. Yeah.
And but we also have people here that tried to get help and didn't get it soon enough, and I'm sad
Right.
to say they ended
Yeah.
their lives, and where the heck can you get help fast? They should. They're begging for help and can't
The
get it.
veterans, specifically on the sheet, I talked about stresssolution.org. I'm telling you, they can go there and get free therapy sessions via Zoom with an evidence-based technique that's better than a lot of the conventional stuff that's out there, as shown by the research. And that's why I wanted to mention that tonight, because as I said before, what I was hearing in the community.
Yep.
So and then of course for the general population, you have the ACEP website, which is also referenced on that sheet.
And we'll make all those links available online when we post the video from today's program as well, so that'll be available through the library website if you want to guide people there.
By the way, the Course of Miracles, remember the lesson, forget the experience.
For the what?
Remember the lesson, forget the experience. So, one of the things that you have to do in your life is, whatever you went through, what was the lesson? We know what the experience is like, how painful it is, but the outcome is, remember the lesson.
Right,
What was I to learn from this?
yes, exactly,
And your journey's your journey,
right,
not Dan's journey.
right.
Changes.
Right.
journeys.
And fundamentally, that's right. Although our lessons may be different, the fundamental thing, what is that lesson
It's your
for
journey.
each one of us respectively with what we're facing in any given moment?
Sorry to touch on that.
No, that's good, no, yeah.
I think the VA tries to fix everything with drugs, and myself, I don't think drugs work at all, they make things worse.
Well, actually, they can, the drugs can make things worse. In some and I do feel they're overprescribed, but in some situations, it's actually a necessity. In some situations, it is a good thing to stabilize people with, well, bipolar disorder. You have to stabilize that or you can't really function or even do therapy. Same thing with schizophrenia or other forms of psychosis. Chemical, you have to balance that out. Other than that, anxiety and what have you, I agree, it's overprescribed, and all you're dealing with is the surface symptoms. You're not dealing with the root cause. You're dealing with things at the level of effect, not at the level of cause. And that's what these energy psychology interventions do. They deal with it at the level of cause. And one quick example of that, I had a Vietnam veteran who was willing to go through this, and I used emotional freedom techniques with him for 7 months. We only met once a month. And as he learned the process, we did things in session. I gave him handouts of, now that we've done this, here's how you do it, and now we've done it, now he can go off with this sheet and do things in between sessions, which he did. He was on a lot of anxiety medication, a Vietnam veteran who woke up every night, night sweats, night terrors, soaking wet every night for 45 years. By the end of 7 months, and as far as I know to this day, at least 4 years before I had left the vet center, he did not have any recurring episodes whatsoever of night sweats, waking up in the middle of the night. The nightmares went away. He was able to drop 2/3 of anxiety medication, and the other 1/3 of it was only on an as-need basis. So, there you go. You're right. The medication typically overprescribed and doesn't really deal with it.
That's the main reason why I've never gone through the VA to get any kind of medical assistance. And a lot of my friends feel the same way. It's because we don't want to be pumped full of a bunch of drugs for things that could be handled with, a less invasive on your body type of way. Like, I'm a big believer in holistic medicine. Just people that really try to dig in and get to the root of the problem and help you figure out why that pain is there in the first place and how to deal with it. I'm not saying the drugs are wrong, but I think they're incredibly overused. And I know veterans who have committed suicide because of the pills that they were taking made them crazy. They literally made them crazy. And I will speak about my own experience. When I first moved here 6 years ago, and I'm not trying to take, but
No, please.
when I first moved here 6 years ago, I was on 6 or 7 different medications and prescription medications that they told me that I was supposed to be on for depression, anxiety, ADHD, like all these other things. As soon as I get one symptom from this medication, then they give me another medication to cover that symptom, and so on and so forth. So different kind of healing techniques work for different people. So the resources that he's giving you, feel free to share those to friends and throw them on Facebook and share them. And a very good resource that my husband and I use, we were actually both facilitators for a faith-based ministry called Operation Restored Warrior, and we've seen so many people get set free from their trauma, to include myself. I no longer have night terrors. I no longer have the night sweats and all of the crazy stuff that used to happen to me. So, I just want to encourage people to just don't reach for the pills if you don't have to. And if they're not working for you, there's other ways. So, that's all I want to say about that.
Well,
Thank you for.
I have a Vietnam vet that's divorced, and he gets up at like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning and does his guard duty. He's been doing that since he got back from Vietnam, and it's really affected his life and gotten him out of being a social person.
Mhm.
You know, does this program, I just wonder how much this program works for.
As I said, 86% of veterans, that's a pretty high number.
Yeah,
86% have benefited from emotional freedom techniques, at least of the 49 veterans that were in this study, which was replicated in other studies, that it eliminated symptoms in shorter sessions compared to conventional techniques with longer lasting results. So I would say that, yeah, it would be worth a try. And so that sheet up there, that has the www.stresssolution.org would be the website for him to navigate. And if he's interested in what he sees, he can go to the Contact Us tab and arrange for free sessions. Has nothing, you have nothing to lose.
Well, the other benefit is that, you know, because it's a medication based therapy, it's not like
right.
you have to worry about
Right.
side effects or anything
And
like
the
that.
price is right.
it's free, yeah.
Yeah. So, I think that really covers everything. Just thinking real quick here, yeah. Yeah, so that covers it. Unless there's any other comments or questions.
I'd like to thank Cameron County for giving me roots and wings.
What's that?
I'd like to thank Cameron County for giving me roots and wings.
Yeah, some crazy things have been happening the last few days.